All right, folks, good morning. My name is Dustin Siggins, and I'm here with Dan, Ashley, and Adam. What we're going to talk about today is the strengths and weaknesses of small and big agencies and how small agencies can compete for business with companies like Dan, where he leads the in-house communications team. So can you all introduce yourselves real quick?
Dan, you should go first. Guest of honor.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I'm Dan Ring. I am an in-house PR and communications leader. I've been doing this in-house for a pretty long time. Prior to that, I was on the agency side, and I'm excited to be here. Ashley, let me turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Dennison, the founder of CommsConsultants.com. I've spent nearly 20 years working in every facet of the communications business, including on the agency side, at the mid-size boutique level, as well as in-house, and the last 10 years as an independent consultant. So a little bit of everything. Adam.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Belmont. I've spent 15 years at two New York agencies, both global and mid-size, serving global and national consumer brands across all verticals. So I'm now an independent, and I continue to serve consumer brands in the same way I have, just bringing my big agency experience to brands who want the expertise without the bloated budgets.
So speaking of bloated, you say global budgets or bloated budgets?
Both.
Okay. So, that's really going to be one of the core points we talk about today. In the year or so that I've been heavily engaged on LinkedIn within the communications world, so many people who have 1, 2, 3, 5 people on their team say that they offer just as much value as an established name brand, large PR firm. But they also complain that their potential clients, the in-house leaders, aren't giving them the opportunity. And so that's what we're going to discuss today is how can small agencies compete? What are the strengths and weaknesses that are inherent in being small versus large? But also, what are some practical tips for small agencies to be able to actually compete? What are processes that can be improved on the sales side, client communication side, et cetera? So Ashley, let's go to you first. At Comms Consultants, you help connect a lot of small agencies to those potential clients. What are those in-house teams that you're talking to, those hiring people, those superiors, what are they looking for in an agency?
Okay. First of all, I'm going to sort of lay to rest the idea that in-house leaders, and hopefully Dan will agree, that they don't see the value, both the cost efficiency value and the expertise and senior counsel value of going with a smaller firm versus one of the big dogs. Because most that I have conversations with 100% do see those points and would love to engage a smaller firm or a suite of smaller firms. But even at pretty high levels, the SVP, EVP level, which is typically who I talk to in-house, they are beholden to what's happening at the C-suite level, what's happening at the CCO, CMO level, and the CEO level. And they have influence, but they only have so much decision-making power when it comes to those relationships. So it's a matter of putting a bug in their ear, I think, a lot of times, and building and warming that relationship over time to try to get the foot in the door. But ultimately, even at least when I'm seeing, Dan, I would love to hear from you too, is a lot of those folks, even very high up within these corporate functions, on paper, very high up, their hands are tied. It's not that they don't see the value. It's not that they wouldn't love to take a chance, take a risk on some smaller firms. It's that there are these legacy long-standing relationships, or there are senior executives who have made decisions, and it's hard to change their minds. But would love to hear from others.
No, what's interesting. So one thing that I just thought about, and this has happened to me before, they're also the decision makers at the board level. So depending on the size of the
Wow.
company, you do have board members who have relationships with bigger firms. I mean, if it's a board member, the individual probably has some credibility and quite a bit of equity, and has relationships with senior leaders at the bigger agencies. And so the optics are already there. So as me, the head of comms, I'm already at a disadvantage in that I have not just executives, but board members as well, who are saying, well, I'd really love for you to consider this big agency.
Okay.
And
Great
yeah.
point.
So when you talk about that, I'd love to consider, like, and Adam, I'd love for you to jump in here, is when you were at the New York agencies that you mentioned, what was the value that you were told, or maybe that you experienced, that was brought by a big firm, and then contrast
Yeah, I
it?
mean,
Good.
yeah, no, I mean, I think there'll also always be really big and major brands that will always go with a large agency. And some you'll never be able to win as a small agency and never have an opportunity to. So I'm not saying that to be doom and gloom in minute 2 here, but speaking from the experience of brands out there who view, being on the agency side, who view agency partners as an insurance policy. And they might not ask for much out of the agency. They might not have many needs at
Oh.
the board level, at the C-suite level. We don't always delivered a lot, but it wasn't always, it was more proactive. But really having those large agencies on deck is a justified and expected line item in their budgets. And that's a CYA for the brand. So they would rather pay money knowing that there are a dozen people who will pick up 24/7 for times that they need it, or drop everything that they're doing, for slides that are due for a board meeting, speaking of boards, in an hour from the
Sure.
call being made. So, so that's always going to be a line of division there. But where I think smaller agencies can play a role is in one of the ways they can play roles approaching those challenger brands, and the ones who want to win but can't, or they don't want to justify the bloated budgets and team structures of large agencies. And those challenger brands are chasing the coattails of the larger brands that the big agencies have. And I think that's white space for smaller agencies as one.
Well, and something we talked about in our prep call a little bit ago, Ashley, was that there's a risk mitigation component to hiring a big firm. And both, Dan, all three of you, again, my first agency is my own. My only in-house roles where I was a halftime PR person, halftime reporter, and then I was the only comms person. So my experience is very limited here outside of observation. But all of you have talked about different risk components, whether it's I have to own up to a budget, right? So I want to use smaller. Or there are executives and then the board who have expectations that they want to work with, and I have to listen to them, even though I'm the senior comms person. But then Adam, you talked about just the relief. Sure, it's going to cost us 15K a month instead of 5K a month, or 30 instead of 10. But okay, I don't know. Again, I've never worked at these large agencies, but the relief factor that I don't have to worry. There's not the stress level wondering, are they overloaded because they're a small firm? Is that what so it sounds like there's several different risk factors here that we're talking about.
There are. Can I just jump in really quick? Because I think one really important risk that happens behind the scenes and really is not about cost consciousness. It's not about who's going to deliver results. It's not about some of those other things I know we're going to talk about, like who has the deep bench of talent or the broad range of specialists. It's something I see happening in closed conversations behind the scenes, which is, it's a very human thing. It's a CYA thing. It's a personal risk aversion with some leaders. So for example, if a chief communications officer comes in, and hopefully Dan will speak to this too, because I think it's an opportunity for small firms. Oftentimes when a new chief comes in, a new chief comms officer, a new head of comms, they're often brought in to get rid of the old, bring in the new, and there's a window of opportunity in like the first 12 months. And that's often a great person to target are leaders who, and you can use Sales Navigator on LinkedIn to do this, who have, joined in 6 to 12 months this role or been promoted to this role, because that's the time they're looking for new thinking, new ideas, new partners. So that's a tip. We're getting ahead of ourselves with tips. But what I want to share is, imagine we're not talking a new leader. We're talking a CCO who has been at the helm for 10 years at, this enterprise company. And for the course of that 10 years, they have had a relationship with Edelman. And it doesn't, I hate to name names, but let's just go with the biggest of the big, right? If Edelman, even if they've been lackluster in results, even if their performance hasn't really been there, even if there have been all these misses on the team, there's still this connection between that CCO and the agency that they brought in, and wanting to have that perceived success and continued relationship. Because if the agency goes, the CCO is going to think and feel too.
That's the human thing. I want to date this person. Well, they're not good for you, but I've made that decision. You kind of hard sometimes to back off from those decisions.
They're connected. Like oftentimes people are connected personally and professionally behind the scenes. And that personal risk mitigation of it's covering my own ass in a way to keep them on board, because if I let them go, I could be out with them as well.
Yeah. But so, and great point. I think what happens in-house after a while, I mean, we all in-house do QBRs. We do these quarterly business reviews. And these are presented to execs, to senior leadership. They might be funneled to board as well. And so after a while, if, from a PR agency perspective, you as the CMO or the head of comms are presenting and you're seeing a downward trajectory quarter after quarter, eventually that personal relationship is going to fray without question. So, I think there's more accountability now, whereas, when I was first starting ages ago, it was, you could have an agency, your agency of record could be there for a long time. Even when I was on the agency side, there were relationships that the agency had with clients that lasted a decade, which is unheard of. But now there's so much more accountability. There's so much more scrutiny from a budget perspective. And if you see it going down and down, it's like, just cut bait. You have to.
Great point.
Let's jump into, a lot of, when I was a smaller agency, we're at 5 people now, but I've been in business about 7 years. And it was super hard to know what to say. Like, it's going to take us 5 weeks to ramp up. I was scared to say that because does someone want to pay $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month for that first month where they're not getting a PR deliverable, so to speak, or getting in the press? Adam, I'd like to pivot to you here. You're a one-person shop. How do you, present yourself in that professional class fashion where someone knows that maybe they don't know you're a one-person shop, or they do, but you present yourself in such a professional fashion where you're zeroing in on exactly what they need? Can you lay out some of the ways that you thought about presenting yourself?
Yeah, and I think to your point, Dustin, there's always going to be an educational standpoint where there is a ramp up. There is an education. You're not going to just go on day one and be like, you're in the Wall Street Journal, go all of us. It's just, that's just going to be an educational standpoint regardless of your size. And, with independents like myself or small agencies, you pay for trust in that individual's abilities and knowing that they're the ones who are actually doing the work and they're not pushing it downwards, and there's nowhere to hide. And to Dan's point on accountability in the agency, a large agency level, there's larger accountability when you're a smaller agency, but use that in a way to benefit the brand as well, because there is in terms of, it's not just selling what the agency can do. You are in the spotlight and you need to embrace that and advocate for yourself and not stand behind the safety wall of an agency or team, and selling in who you are and that building that trust and accountability. But
let's talk about process here, Adam, a little bit, because someone can be very confident and completely crash and burn, or someone can, again, I didn't understand the scope of work call until year 3 of my business. I had sold $20,000 contracts in a 45-minute phone call. Someone came to me, they found us, I was contributing to Forbes at the time, and they found me on LinkedIn. They were doing 60 million a year. They wanted to get to 50 mil, and they had never had a marketing campaign outside of posting on LinkedIn. And I said, great, full scope project. It's going to cost you $910,000 for PR, influencer, digital marketing. It was less than 2% of the gross they wanted to gain in the following 12 months. I was told that we were too expensive. They missed the call. Even the guy recommended a certain time because I didn't invite him. He missed the call. And when I followed up 30 days later, he blocked me. Okay. That's really my fault because I didn't understand that if I'm going to ask somebody to spend $1 million with me, it might be the right plan, but I haven't earned that trust. I haven't built the processes for what a proposal looks like, what the first 3 months, 6 months, 9 and 12. Maybe my pricing was wrong. Maybe my pricing model, the way I framed it, 2 months up front, non-refundable. I want to talk more about those processes. I think, Dan, if you can speak to this a little bit, those big agencies do have those processes. They do have everything buttoned up, so they show up the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I think having used big agencies and small agencies and contractors, I can only speak for myself. I cannot speak for others. There are lots of irrational people in comms in-house. And not just in comms, there are lots of irrational decision makers at companies. For those of us who are rational, we understand that it takes time to ramp up. The expectations are that the in-house comms leader is going to set up a bunch of scoping calls with the outside representation over the course of the first 30 days. And we'll load up that person or that team with these calls. And then from there, they can develop their plan. I mean, they have an initial plan from the pitch, but it's going to be, it should be dramatically different after, based on scoping calls. And then from there, in month 2, they'll start working on some deliverables. And then month 3, hopefully you're actually seeing some good tangible results. And that's how it should be. If you're, Adam or you're Edelman, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think, unless, of course, the agency or the individual at the pitch is saying, we're going to get you all of this coverage immediately because we have worked very closely in this space. We've worked with your direct competes. We know the landscape, et cetera. And then they're the ones who are setting the expectations, which I think are unrealistic, and it's just setting them up to fail. I don't want a PR agency to be set up to fail. But when they're the ones who are setting these expectations that are being presented to the decision makers, I think it's just foolish. It's like, go to the folks who have the reasonable, rational expectations. That's what it comes down to.
So actually, we talked. Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll just build on that as well. From my side of things, is that there's 2 things that I put in key things to put in proposals, and that they are the same now as they were in my big agency career. The framework that Dan is mentioning of how you're going to approach it, not just to win the business, but in terms of how you approach counseling, how you approach the admin, account servicing, how you approach setting up the messaging framework and matrices and all that kind of stuff, and strategic frameworks and overviews, and also case studies and receipts. And regardless of size, as a senior professional, you have those. So, and that's in every, new business deck from a big agency side. And it could be included for small agencies and consultants as well.
Well, actually, I'll pivot to you in just a moment. One of the things that we developed in my company, we do a lot of op-eds. And it's actually, I think it's going to be a growing service for us because so many PR firms are now pivoting more to Substacks and LinkedIn, which is rational, which leaves this huge hole. And what our process is, we have a 3-day guarantee. We can't guarantee placement. We'll guarantee a turnaround if you need it within 3 days, where we write it. We have an internal fact checker and researcher who double checks everything, make sure that what's being said is precise to the links used and the claims made. And then we have a copy editor, and then my eyes are the last ones on the piece. So it gets 4 sets of eyes before it goes to somebody. I figured that was the norm. And when I started explaining that, there were people like, you have how many people on your team? Oh, 5. You do this in 3 days with that many sets of eyes? Yes, we do. Okay, you have a process. Now it sounds like a trusted, to your point, Dan, process. But it took me years to learn how to present it that way, where it didn't sound like we're a small team and we're overwhelmed, but where it's a small team that is professional and you're going to get a high quality product, in this case, the op-ed, that is ready to be placed. So, Ashley, what is the biggest hole that you see with small, 1 to 5 person companies when they're trying to compete for that big business, what's the biggest mistake that you see when they're presenting themselves?
It might be kind of the story you went through earlier, going for, swinging for the fences.
Oh, sure.
Going for the
Yeah.
big, annual retainer contract, long-term partnership. I always advise, whether it's, especially in this market where people are so, what's the right word? Restless, uncertain, unsure, risk averse. But I've always just advised, whether you're an independent contractor, consultant, whether you're a boutique firm owner, whether you run a mid-sized firm, that you have a range of entry offers, trial offers, and guarantees too, Dustin. I love that. Where you can come to the table, not just with one option. Hey, here we can be your agency of record. We can do an annual partnership. Here's the full scope. This is what this looks like. First of all, everyone loves a menu of offerings. I've always done well. My mentor, who I have to shout out on this call, Jason Anthoine, always calls it the Chevy, Buick, and Cadillac options. People respond very, very well to having a range of service offerings and cost options to choose from. You're a lot less likely to get a no. And then if you can layer on top of that some kind of entry offer, trial offer, probationary offer. Now, that's always how decision makers engage agencies and partners. Let's be real, they're in the driver's seat. Everything is probationary and can be cut at 30 days notice at any time. Sorry, I'm getting a call really quick. But the benefit is laying it out in detail, just the way you talked about laying out your process, Dustin, having a already established, proactively communicated probationary offer feels like a very low risk way to begin to establish trust, create a relationship, see what you can do, have some metrics tied to it. That's a lot harder to say no to. Excuse me for just a second. I'll be right back.
No problem. Dan, you want to take over?
Yeah, happy to. So am I following up on what Ashley was saying, or did you want me to pivot to something else?
Anything. I mean, I thought you raised some good points about the value a small agency can show just by having those basic things in place. When you're looking at that, how important is that sort of buttoned up on the appearance, but also, some of those details. Again, I went for this huge enchilada rather than remembering earn trust with the basics for 3 months at a lower price point.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, what I'm looking for and what my peers are looking for can vary based on budget, based on need, resources, etc. Sorry, I'm just getting inundated in texts. When I look at an agency, there's the scope of work, and that can change over time. And I let the agency know. It's like, guys, this is not set in stone. It's going to move around. There could be 1 quarter or 1 month where you're going to be focused more on this, when we're going to be focused more on that. But I can say that with agencies, if I'm looking at an individual, a boutique, a mid-sized shop, or a big agency, at the end of the day, it's like what we're all looking for is coverage, and it's coverage and content that we can then share with our colleagues in the field, in sales, because that's what they want. They want assets. I think executives understand now that it's not vanity coverage. They're looking for content that the salespeople can use when they're reaching out to their prospects, to their existing customers, to their partners. That's what they want. I don't know of anyone who's looking for anything vanity. They're looking for things that are going to help them and help their salespeople sell, or an extension of sales.
You're not in politics, Dan. There's a lot of vanity placements in politics.
Oh yeah, exactly. In B2B, it's much less so. I mean, one thing that Ashley said, and it was, and I agree completely. It's the 30-day termination. It's like that's top of mind, I think, for everyone. And I mean, just a related side. Whenever I've come into any organization, be it as a fractional head or as a permanent head, I'm always inheriting an agency, and the person, my predecessor, not necessarily someone in comms, but someone else, will send me the contract and it'll be like a 90-day termination. It's like, well, that's
Right.
asinine. I cannot believe that someone agreed to that.
Right.
I want agencies to get paid, but I also don't want to waste money. So I wanted to mention that because I'm happy that Ashley brought that up. But I don't know, Adam, if you have thoughts as you're in a, I mean, you're in a space, in a spot where you have some flexibility, some wiggle room, maybe, I hope.
Well, and
Yeah,
actually,
I
Adam,
think
as you respond to Dan, let's also plug yourself here. What is the service that you're providing that's really specialized and you can present the best to compete against a large agency? Let's actually give a real example here by plugging yourself.
sure. I mean, also, I come from big agencies for my whole career, working with big brands. So having that brain that brands pay a lot of money for as a account lead, office lead, whatever it may be, and being able to bring that to smaller brands who may not know that they can get a level of service and understanding, or that they might not know that that exists, or they might not know that they deserve that. So I think there's, just in terms of a lot of great experience, priceless experience I've gained from that allows me to provide a level of service that smaller brands don't know that they can get. But I think, in terms of what Dan was saying on flexibility, I think that is paramount. And I've fortunately been in great big agency cultures in some ways, in that not locking people in just to lock people in, or really just being good partners and being good stewards and extensions of the internal team. And that's my approach as a solopreneur as well, is relationships matter the most, and being a good partner and good person matters the most, and whatever is in the best interest of the working relationship. And
Well, and
not
to that,
trying to set anything up or set any parameters or guardrails to my benefit out of fear or defense mechanism.
one of the things that my business partner said early on was always leave money on the table, right? If you try to take exactly the letter of the contract as the agency of record, you're going to frustrate things. It's okay to do an extra call here and there. There's a difference between leaving money on the table in a smart relationship building way and scope creep, where you are giving away money to the client. And actually, something you posted about the other day on LinkedIn, speaking of scope and being flexible, was price. Right? Early on, I mean, I established a pretty firm policy for the company where we may compromise price where we want to, but if someone asks us to, it's not something that's part of our strategy. Keeping the price firm to showcase value, but also to make sure that the headache client who's going to want a nickel and dime doesn't become a client. Kind of saying no early in our process, that actually saved my company. We were on the edge of going out of business, had $1,000 left in company savings. We had kid number 2 of 5 on the way. And we had this big contract, and the decision maker said, well, can you charge us less for this part? And I said, I remember looking at the wall at the Wegmans. I didn't have an office at the time. And I was just working in that little back area. And I just thought, I might have to go look for a job. And I said, no, I can't compromise the price. And 2 months later, as we were working with him, someone asked him, why'd you choose Dustin? And he said, because he believes in his product. He didn't compromise his price. But you had a bit of a different perspective, Ashley, the other day on LinkedIn. I'd like to explain that a little bit, kind of a bit of a price discussion for a few minutes here.
Ooh, a price
strategy.
discussion. Wow, we might need a whole separate LinkedIn Live to get
We
it.
have to be done in 13 minutes because Dan has a call. So
No, I know.
don't spend too much time.
I mean, I think high level, I mean, if we're talking about agencies, small firms versus the big dogs, which is the topic of this live. First of all, I think we boutique and small agency owners have to compete on price. That's an expectation. We are going to have to compete on price. The one outlier I see to that with very small firms, and this was in my post, Dustin, is if your specialty is extremely niche extremely niche. You know, you specifically run trade shows for manufacturing companies and you're the best in the business at it. If you do something so niche and so specialized and so rare, then you can actually make more as a boutique agency owner and set your prices even higher than the big dogs. But if you're, you know, more trying to compete on that range of offerings, you're more of a full service small team. I think the expectation is going to have to be, or it just is, and Dan, tell us if we're wrong, that you're going to have to come in lower than the big dogs because they're expecting that as a feature and a benefit to bringing you in. And the last thing I'll say, I have to speak to what goes on behind the scenes because this was a key part of my post. And I care about people who are actually doing the work,
Right.
not necessarily senior executives getting, you know, the vast amount of the spoils. When you choose, if there are any decision makers following this conversation today, when you choose a small firm, a boutique firm, a small business, far more of the billings are going to the people actually doing the work, as where when you choose a big agency, be mindful that 80% of those exorbitant hourly rates that you're paying for fairly low level support, 80% is going to overhead and senior executive salaries. So keep that in mind when you're looking at that breakdown, that side-by-side comparison of hourly rates.
Yeah, so you bring up some really good points. The you know, the firm or the individual who's focused on that niche, on that specialty, absolutely. They can charge more and they should charge more. They need to monetize that shit without question. I
We had 2
think,
curse words. I've had 9 of these, and I've had 2 curse words in this one alone.
well,
So
I mean, I've actually pared back my expletives. Normally I'm expletive laden,
You
but I
went to
think,
the agency world, it's the expletives out the wazoo. Anyway, keep going.
but I think so. I totally agree with that niche, that specialty aspect. When it comes to agencies, one thing that I can share, and it's not me, but once again, these aforementioned peers of mine, we loathe when, you know, we're looking at agencies and the bigger agencies or the mid-size agencies. I'm not going to put a number on it, but when they say, yeah, no matter what you want us to do, the minimum budget is the minimum retainer is X amount. And it's like, well, you know what, if you're already going to mandate a minimum, then, you know, no dice, no interest at all.
right.
There's got to be some kind of wiggle room, some kind of flexibility. I mean, I do think that, you know, with agencies that have like the one thing that's important, and I know a lot of people on LinkedIn will slam agencies and companies
Right.
that have offices, and they shouldn't, because most of these offices were leased pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. Um, and you know, people, do agency leaders want the overhead? No. But on the other hand, it's like they have it, and you know, they have it for one reason or another. But you know, a lot of expense has to go to the overhead, obviously, but I am cognizant of those agencies that do have office space. And, you know, when I see a lot of other folks who will go unnamed on LinkedIn who are just bashing them for having these hybrid or return to office
Right.
mandates, it's, you
Well,
know, I just don't think they understand.
I'll name Perry Hedrick, who slams this a lot. And I run a remote team. Well, I'm bringing it up in a conversational fashion here. I run a remote team, but I can absolutely, especially as an extrovert, see the value of that water
Yeah.
cooler conversation. You're walking by each other. It's easier to build culture in person in many respects. And Perry obviously sees the opposite because of the commutes and other components. And maybe, and I don't know Perry personally, I see his stuff on LinkedIn. You know, maybe he's able to run a great culture remotely. But
Yeah,
again,
and there are many. I mean, there I see many PR people who, you know, take that approach, and I think it's unfair, um, quite honestly.
Dustin, we should get to tips because I know we promised practical tips,
yes.
and I know people are hungry for it. Tips, tips, tips.
Well, and the first step I want to get to is Colin commented and asked, he quote, curious to hear the panel's thoughts of when a brand works with both a large agency and a smaller one at the same time. What's the best way for the small agency to not get overshadowed and demonstrate value when they're partnered with a larger agency? And Adam, you haven't said anything in a few minutes, so I want to pivot to you to respond first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same way that any agency would work with collaboratively in an interagency team with another agency. They got to stand up for themselves. They have to provide guardrails for themselves, and they have to have an ongoing lines of communication. So I have interagency teams across different sizes. Ashley, what were you going to say? Jump in.
No, I don't want to cut you off. You just made me think of something. Keep going, Adam. We want to hear.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's just, I don't think there's a distinction between how they communicate, but I think they just ongoing lines of communication are important, and um and always staying visible. And you know, it's you always want to be good partners and good interagency collaborators and all of that stuff, but you also want to make sure that you are standing up for what you should be based on what your area of focus is.
So I have something to add to Adam's thought, and I think it's a real differentiator for the small firms. It's one of the biggest reasons that, remember I said those decision makers behind the scenes, they see the value, they want to bring on these small firms, and they're frustrated many times with actually the day-to-day execution of their giant agencies and what's really happening. A huge benefit boutique agency owners have is that responsive access to senior counsel.
Yeah, absolutely.
When that, you know, whoever it is on the team on the corporate side has a quick call any time of day, no matter what, no matter when, to get the ear and the advice of the senior counselor, the senior trusted advisor who's leading that boutique agency team, or, you know, one of the top members of it, that is gold. That's absolutely gold. And it's a stark contrast between the day-to-day experience of using one of those big agencies. Because then this is a common complaint. We've all seen it a million times. We've experienced it. But what happens, these big agencies, what they do, and it's a profitability thing. They have to do it this way because of the way that they're structured. They bring in the big guns, the senior talent, who really have vision and strategy to bring in the business and keep the business, right? They're brought in to sell the business, pitch the business, win the business. They're brought in for renewal conversations. They're brought in for important strategy sessions and check-ins. Day to day, that is not who's doing the work. That is not who you have direct access to. In many, many cases, unfortunately, you're working with someone around the AE level, maybe the SAE level, who and I'm not diminishing those professionals. They work so hard on the agency side. I've been one of them, but they're a few years out of college, usually, almost always less than 10 at that level. And what so often happens, if you've got a corporate entity that is working with both, let's say, an Edelman and a boutique firm or a group of senior consultants, I've experienced this myself, they'll bring the work that was done by the agency team to one of those senior consultants or the boutique agency owner for a redo, for a refresh, for new thinking, because they've iterated a few times with the AE or the SAE that's doing it, and they're just not getting it. They're just not at that level, and they need someone like me, a ringer, to come in quickly do it, quickly return it. So if you can really step up that senior counsel, if you have one of those relationships, be their point person, you're going to prove that value every single day. Yeah.
Real quick, Ashley, you were right. I was losing track of the time, so you point out we needed some tip time. So let's do a rapid fire. Everyone gets 45 seconds or so. My biggest tips are actually going to come from the internal processes. One of the things that we talk about is a headache-free experience. I mentioned earlier our op-ed experience, 3-day turnaround. This is the process, the writing, editing, fact-checking process gives that confidence that we're a small agency that can turn things around. Because the first thing we say on our guarantees page is we can't guarantee placement, but here's what we can. So by establishing those, we have those processes internally that we believe create that upfront communication with the client to establish outcome expectations and establish that it's not going to be a headache process as we go. Adam, over to you, because I want you to talk about networking, what I prefer to call building your network. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think one thing that small agencies generally have to accept that they won't be part of the consideration set for a traditional RFP from large brands. And so they have to make their own way and forge their own path and have opportunities coming through your own networking. So you got to stand up, advocate for yourself, and when you sell in your services, you don't just sell in your work. You sell in who you are. You're the one doing the work.
Right.
And so also networking, not just with prospects, but with industry colleagues and going after those big fish together. I know Ashley has a lot to say on this too. And I might not, but Dustin, I know we're in the process, not naming any names, but co-collaborating with other senior folks on big proposals for big fish that we wouldn't be able to have a chance on alone. So,
That's right.
I might not be able to compete with a 10-person agency serving a big brand, but 3 of me can. And it's having that deep bench across the board.
Dan, over to you.
So it doesn't matter if if it's a consultant, if it's small agency, a big agency. For me, it's being proactive. If that person is going to reach out to me, and it doesn't matter if it's always going to be unsolicited, and it can be ideally it's done via email and not done via LinkedIn, and hopefully it's not done via an invasive text if they have my mobile number. But if they can actually demonstrate, if they can be proactive, I mean, what we all want in agency relationships are individuals on the team who are proactive, who are like, hey, I just saw this. I think this has legs. Let's capitalize on this opportunity. It can be in a variety of ways. So being proactive is huge. But if they're going to come to me and say, hey, this regulation just popped, you probably are aware of it, but
Yes.
have you guys thought about it? Your competitors haven't capitalized on it yet.
Yeah.
That goes a long way. Like that goes into the mental Rolodex, and it goes into the other figurative Rolodexes. That's huge.
And on that point, and actually, we'll close out with your tips. I actually did that the other day. Something came out in the health. President Trump did something. I forget what it was. Oh, it was the price ceilings, the most favored nation on drug prices.
Mm-hmm.
So I pinged several past current clients as well as a couple of prospects and just had a 2-paragraph. Folks saw this. We have a deep bench of authors who can write op-eds pushing back on this from a free market perspective, because a lot of our public affairs clients need those voices and don't have them on hand. And we got one reply from a former client that said, do you have this specific type of author? Yes, we do. And one of our current clients said, thank you, I had missed that one. Really glad you brought that to my attention. But it was maybe 2 paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley, finish us off.
And I know Dan has to go, so feel free to jump off whenever you need to, Dan.
Oh, I can stick on for now. I'll be fashionably late.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have 3 tips. One is companies to pitch. One is people to pitch that I kind of already touched on, and 2 or 3 is something to include and highlight throughout the pitch process really, really heavily. So one is companies to pitch. If we're talking about Fortune 500s, which often we are in these types of conversations, we should all be watching the news every day, right? If we're PR and comms people. Industry news, but also social media feeds, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Twitter, whatever it is, X, sorry about that. But we should be watching all the industry news. When you see someone, a company in the Fortune 500 doing something different, any kind of different, anything innovative with the way they're approaching media, with a guest column from one of their executives, with news coming out about their internal comms strategy or something they're doing with their culture. When you see something new happening with one of those Fortune 500s, that's a signal. That's a signal that someone on the leadership team has a vision and a forward way of thinking instead of sticking in the old tried and true way of doing everything. And that is, to me, a green light to pitch, to say, not only do you now have a talking point, you have something relevant and timely you can speak to. Wow, I saw that you're doing this. Let's talk about it. This is what it makes me think of. It also signals that at least one member, probably multiple members of the leadership team, are open to new things, open to new ways of thinking. So that's one tip. 2 is say you have a company identified through that process, who to choose to reach out to.
Yes.
The decision maker level, sure. I mean, a lot of us go for the CCO, CMO level, and you can do that. I often, like I said, like to go for that SVP, EVP level because they have the ear of the CCO or the CMO. They're influential voices that can help drive the decision. They may not hold the purse strings entirely, but if you can get them on as an internal advocate for you, if you can build a real relationship with someone at that level over time, as Adam said, that networking, that relationship building, it takes time. But you're going to need an advocate, a strong voice within the organization speaking for you and your firm. But use Sales Navigator and try that tip of looking for people at the SVP, EVP level who are within 12 months of joining the organization or being
Right.
put into that role. Because that's the point when they're looking to showcase their vision, their strategy, their thinking by bringing in new ideas. And one of those new ideas could be your firm. The last thing I'll say is, we didn't touch on it too much, but a huge reason I still hear leaders choosing the big firms is that breadth and variety of talent, right?
Right. The deep bench.
Not,
Yes.
and not just deep in terms of numbers of people, although that's part of it, just the, oh my gosh, the scores of people that we
Right.
can have if we need them, but the variety. Like, I mean, we talked about this in the pre-call. If you need someone to quickly put together a TikTok campaign for you, oh, we got that.
Sure.
You need
Right.
someone who can jump in on the public affairs side, who has government relations experience and can speak a highly regulated industry, can jump in on this. We got someone for that. You need a crisis response expert. Yep, we can bring that in today. That ability to bring in those specialists, that variety of specialization, is a key factor that a lot of folks consider. So if you're a small firm owner, you need to be shouting from the rooftops about your network. And I'm not talking about your network of decision makers of the Fortune 500. I'm talking about your network of fellows in your field and across the Marcom space that you know designers, you know video storytellers, you know AI comms experts, you know executive presentation coaches, and you can pull them in at a minute's notice to engage on this team because you have this unbelievable robust network.
And I'll just add one little comment on that, Ashley, too, is, again, we talked earlier about leaving money on the table versus scope creep, that fine line. There's also a fine line, in my opinion, between saying you have so many people and so many people in your network, but coming across as more of an inch deep and a mile wide as well. So make sure that, as a small agency, we're a PR firm. We have a digital marketing vendor that we use, but we only bring that into the conversation with a very small select number of prospects. So make sure you don't, to Ashley's point, have that deep bench, but make sure that your frontline sales is still focused on the niche specialty that you bring to compete against those big dogs.
Depends on if you have a niche or specialty.
Bye, Dan.
I got to scoot. Thanks, everyone. A pleasure.
And it depends on if you have a niche or specialty. I mean, I know there are smaller firms. I don't know how many firms of 1 to 5 people, but there are definitely boutique firms that are trying to be full service agencies, that are trying to be full service teams. So if you're going at it as a full service team, they don't need to be employees. They don't even need to be active freelancers on your roster, but you have to have that bench. And I just think even if you are a specialist, Dustin, like you're describing, it benefits you. In today's day and age, it really benefits you. I'm all about that because I built CommsConsultants, but it really benefits you to have those people on call, even if it's just to make a referral, to be that trusted advisor for that person who can make a referral, make a quick connection, and show that you can provide value in that way too.
Well, but let's pivot to Adam here. I know we're technically running past time. We'll wrap it up real fast here, but I think you've hit a good point, Ashley, where you and I probably spent an hour talking about one topic without anyone else involved in the conversation. But I want to bring Adam into this because, Adam, you, as I understand it, you offer a variety of services as a solopreneur, but you also have that standalone podcast website. So where do you find that fine line between we can do a lot, but also maybe bringing in 1 or 2 services to the front that gets you in the door?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be case by case, brand by brand basis, right, of what they need. But the important part that we all agree on is if I'm honest with them, if I'm not the right person for a specific piece of their scope and business. And the important part is not trying to, again, going back to the relationship building and making sure that you are positioning yourself as a trusted partner, not just a vendor, not just this or that, and being honest with them and transparent and saying, I could do this, that, and the other. For this, I can absolutely bring somebody in who I absolutely trust with everything and is a senior professional and in this very niche specific space or service. So I think it's just goes back to having good judgment and not overselling, not trying to square peg round hole who you are.
Right.
Know who you
Yes.
are, but also know what you're capable of and know your limits at the same time, whether you're an individual or, small agency. But
It makes a lot of sense. So let's do this. Let's wrap up. Everyone plug themselves real quick, and then we'll let everyone get back to their Friday. Adam, go first. I want to close on Ashley.
sure. Yeah. Find me on LinkedIn, Adam Belmont, A-to-B Strategies. I, serve consumer brands from my own agency, also work fractionally within other agencies, and obviously collaborate with other senior folks like yourselves.
Dustin Siggins, Proven Media Solutions. We put your clients in the press. We fill your gaps for earned media, whether it's 1 day, 1 week, or 1 year. No retainer required. Ashley?
That elevator pitch down. That's really good, Dustin. I'm Ashley Dennison. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Just crossed 13,000 followers, I'm very excited to say. And my LinkedIn content strategy is I write whatever the hell I want. So go enjoy.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your Fridays.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the chat.